Hello everyone and welcome to lecture 8.2, Electing the President. With election day coming up here in just a few days, this is obviously right up our alley, and chances are we're going to be doing this lecture actually on election day, just how things are shaping out this year. All right guys, I want you to take a second. I want you to actually look at this political cartoon that's on screen and take a little bit of time and think and see what do you see that's going on. All right, I mean, it should be pretty obvious. You have the elephants that are the Republicans and the donkeys that are Democrats, and they're fighting for the electoral votes. They're fighting for the states, and in particular, they're fighting here for Ohio, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Colorado. And this is really what our elections are, and we're going to get into that today in terms of what actually is going on. And you guys probably already know some of this stuff just from previous classes, and then also just paying attention to what's going on currently in this election season. So let's get started. All right. So those of you that are home, before I get started, I'm going to ask you guys to actually step out of this video, stop it, go to the original PowerPoint of this and click on the blue link there for the Electoral College, and you guys are going to watch a video by Vox that explains the Electoral College, and it does a really good job explaining the whole system. And those of you that are in person will do it in person. Now, let's actually talk about the Electoral College and how it works. So our electors in this system are the representatives and senators. Now, they typically, what happens is they meet in their own states in the original system, and then they cast votes for two presidential candidates. Originally, we didn't have a popular vote. I think the first popular vote was in 1824 or 1828. So we had quite a few elections before the popular vote even existed in our elections process. Now, how this worked in the original system, the Electoral College, is that the majority vote, whoever voted for the majority, or whoever got the majority, became president. And then the second person that got the highest number of votes became the vice president. And if there was a tie or no majority, then the House of Representatives would vote with one vote per state, and then that would determine who became president and vice president. Now, that's the original system, and it has changed a bit since, but for the most part, it's still the same. It's the real big differences are, and you're going to see going forward, is how we're going to determine the president and vice president on those majorities. Now, after Washington was president, excuse me, we start to see political parties begin. And I want you guys to think about reasons why. Why were there no real political parties during Washington's presidency, but then after him, we start to see them take shape? All right, so now we're going to talk about the impact of party politics, and we're going to start with the year 1800. We had the two parties. We had the Federalists, who were mainly Northerners and those that favored strong federal government, and then the Democratic Republicans, who were mainly Southerners and favored more states' rights. Now, ultimately, what ends up happening is the election of 1800 turns our system kind of on its head a little bit. We have the Democratic Republicans who favored Jefferson and Burr, but there was a tie. Now, there was an agreement between Jefferson and Burr that Burr would become the vice president. This was done before the voting. But ultimately, what ends up happening is the vote gets sent to the House because of the tie. Now, there was a problem for Jefferson, is his political rivals, the Federalists, actually favored Burr and controlled the House, and they were the ones that were going to vote. They debated for 6 days, and ultimately, as we know, it wasn't Aaron Burr that was selected as president. It was Thomas Jefferson. But ultimately, the reason why this is important is not the actual outcome. It's the fact that you had this problem in itself, because it meant that we needed to change the rules, because this system currently wasn't working. So how it changes is with the 12th Amendment in 1804. It's where electors end up casting separate ballots for the president and vice president. And if there's no majority, then the House vote will be between the top three candidates, and in the Senate, it'll be between the top two. To make this all simple for you guys, here's the basic gist of it and how it changes with the 12th Amendment. Is now you have your vice president linked to a presidential candidate. So like in this election, you have Biden and Harris, and you have Trump and Pence. Whereas before this amendment, you actually had nobody that was linked, and basically whoever finished second would become vice president. It'd be like if we still had this today, whoever wins the election here coming up on November 3rd becomes president, and whoever loses becomes VP. So that's a little, so they got rid of that. Now in the 1820s, like I said, you start seeing the popular vote. All right, so now let's talk about the Electoral College today. It's the president, a presidential candidate is chosen by convention, and you guys know ballots are cast every 4 years because the presidential term is 4 years. But really, you're voting for all electors in your state. So in November, you have the popular election, and in December, the electors actually cast the vote for president and vice president. So really, in effect, guys, the real election, regardless, or whoever, the real outcome of the election, regardless who wins on November 3rd, or whatever date it gets determined, that is actually effectively not even them being elected. That's just the popular election. They're actually not officially elected until December, when the representatives and senators officially cast the ballots. Now, the reason why this isn't typically well known, and why we always say, oh, the election's in November, is because for the majority of reasons, or majority of people, it's the same. The electors are going to be voting for the same as the people, generally. Now, you have 538 electors that are part of the Electoral College. The person that wants to become president needs 270 to win. Okay? Now, how do you get to the 538? Well, it's pretty simple. You have the 100 that are a part of the Senate. You have the 435 that are part of the House of Representatives. And then you have the 3 that make up Washington, D.C. And that's your 538, and that's why you need 270. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a few maps here, a couple from 12 and a couple from 16. They're going to be state ones and county ones, and I want you guys to take a second, pause these, and just take a second and look at what you see. What are some patterns that you see, whether it's red or blue, and so forth. And you can see that the darker something is, the more solidified it was for that political party, and the lighter it was the more of a battleground that county was. Now, for whatever reason, guys, I have no idea why Alaska is gray and not reporting data, but they voted Romney in 2012, just to let you know. All right, now now that you've paused the video and taken a second to actually look at this stuff, I want you to, there's one key thing that you can take a look at, and we saw this and we looked at it in the video. If you guys were in class on Netflix, Whose Vote Counts, is if you know where big cities are, you're going to notice that they're blue. If you notice those really, really solidly red areas, specifically here in the middle of the country, there's not a lot of people here. There's a huge urban-rural divide that's happened here in this country to show that shows out in terms of who gets elected and so forth. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. If you look at Pennsylvania, okay, Pennsylvania, most of its counties here are red. But if you look at these blue areas, this is Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are over here. Pennsylvania went to Barack Obama in 2012. So the county, if you just look at the counties, it can throw you off. Okay, but it's all about the number of people too. All right, so now I want you guys to look at, this is 16. So this is actually what happened when Trump won in 16. He got 306. Clinton got 232. You could see that mainly where she lost and Trump won is that Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida in particular were blue states, and I believe Georgia was as well in 8 and 16, and they switched hands. She lost all of them in very close votes in a number of those states. In a couple percentage points here or there, if they would have switched, then you're looking at the number on the opposites. You're looking at a different winner and basically the numbers flipping. That's how our Electoral College works, because remember, it's a winner-take-all system. If all you have to do is win one vote over 50%, and you're going to end up getting all of those votes for Pennsylvania or all those votes for Virginia. And that can change something and make a really, really close race look like something that's a landslide, or make a big race or not a very close race even look more of a landslide. All right. Now this right here, this is actually, so this is the county map for 2016. You can see it's much redder, it's much darker, and this is why, not Obama, why Trump was able to win. You don't really see much difference here in Pennsylvania, although it's a little less lighter blue and then a little bit darker red, and that's an example of kind of what happened. Same thing for Michigan. Michigan changed hands. Michigan was a blue state in 12, and it was a red state in 16. Okay, these maps are very, very important to look at, and we'll actually take a look at what these in class when we see the 2021 come out eventually, if we have time. All right, so the Electoral College, one of the biggest things here is whether to keep it or not. And we've already talked about this in class, those of you that watch the video, whose vote counts. And the basic thing here is I'm not gonna read this out. I want you guys to actually pause the video here, take a couple minutes and actually look at these various election graphs and then what is said at the top of the screen about the Electoral College. I am going to mention a couple though to show you kind of how kind of misleading an electoral vote can be versus the popular vote in a couple of elections, and then I'll move on. So like for example here, look at right here in 84. Mondale, he clearly lost the election by a wide margin in 84, even with the popular vote. But look at how much of the electoral vote he got. He only got 2%, but almost 41% of the people voted for him. That can show you really how much this Electoral College can actually swing versus what the people actually want. And that's the big problem that we're seeing here in recent years. And in recent years, it's starting with 2000 and we see it in 16. And I'm not trying to lean one way or the other here, but in 20, if Trump wins, the chances are of him winning is he's not going to win the popular vote. He would only win the electoral vote, but he would still become president. And we've only had a few times throughout our history where a president has lost the popular vote and won the electoral vote and become president. And I think it's only 4 times, maybe 5 times, I can't remember with 16, but it's happened in the last 20 years twice. In 2000, as you can see here, even though it was very, very close, and this third-party candidate, Ralph Nader, threw it off, and then in 2016, with a chance of it happening in 2020. All right. Here's the 2012 electoral vote. This kind of shows you the power of the states themselves, because everybody always looks at it and goes, well, how does this candidate win? Specifically a Democratic candidate. So like if you were to go look at this one, the defining color here is red. Well, again, remember, it's all based on population and representation. You have California that has 58 votes. Wyoming only has 3. So it's a huge difference. 55 votes in California. So it's a huge difference in terms of what you're seeing there. Okay. All right. So we already kind of talked about some of these issues already in class with the video, and then just earlier on in these slides. So the Electoral College is a winner-take-all system, and to be honest with you, generally it is pretty fair because it generally reflects the will of the people. This should be a change. It is 5 times, and this should be 2016 Donald Trump. So it does make it possible to win even if you lose the popular vote. Now, I'm not going to go through all 5 times and how who the president was in losing those popular votes. But again, I already mentioned in the previous slide, we're seeing this become more and more of an issue, and the reason being is because of gerrymandering. And in recent years, that gerrymandering has been beneficial to one particular party, even though they both do it. And in the case that we're seeing with the beneficial party being the Republicans, winning in 2000 with George W. Bush, and then winning in 16 with Trump, and a possibility in 2020 with Trump again. So if that were to happen, let's say Trump wins here in 2020 and loses the popular vote, that means it's happened 6 times. It would have happened 6 times, and it's happened 3 times in 20 years. That's not a good sign for what's going on. That's nothing against the person that actually wins. It's just you don't generally want to see that in your elections, because that tells you that the process that's actually in place isn't working the way it's supposed to. And even if you look at it further, one of these 5 times in how it's happened was the election of 1860, and our country was divided and ultimately went to into the Civil War. So it's something a little bit different. You don't usually see it. It's not normal to lose the popular vote and still win the presidency. And primarily, one of the main reasons why it's happened in the case of people or presidents losing the popular vote and becoming president generally happens if there's a strong third party. And third parties can make it difficult for major parties to get enough votes to win. And we've seen that in a couple of instances. In particular, in 2000, this man right here, Ralph Nader, the leader of the Green Party, affected the election here in terms of majority of his votes normally would have went to Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, and he got almost 3% of the vote. There's a chance that if there was even just 1% of those votes had went to Gore instead of him, we have a different president in 2000. Same thing happened with third party in 1860. You have the division between the Democrats, Republicans, and the Constitutional Party, and Abraham Lincoln becomes president, and then you see the South secede and you have a civil war. So they can cause problems. Now, the election by the House. So essentially what happens is if there are issues, the House will cast 1 vote per state if there's a tie. We talked about this at the very beginning of the lecture. Here's the problem with that. If you ever get a tie in one state and the states get 1 vote, now you have small states such as Wyoming, who only has like 400,000 people, and California, who has 30-some million people, are equal, and that can really be an issue and throw things off. And again, third parties can cause problems and make it difficult to get to the 26 votes that are needed if there's an event of a tie. And this happened in 2000, and it could happen here in 20. All right, some further issues and ideas for reform, and you guys have looked at this if you were in class or had Netflix and you watched the video on whose vote counts. They brought up some ideas on how to reform the Electoral College, reform our election system, such as getting rid of gerrymandering, maybe getting rid of the Electoral College altogether. But some people think that to change the Electoral College is you keep it, but just make it better, such as choosing electors from congressional districts so you get 2 votes plus the number of districts, kind of giving a little bit more representation there for the areas, or making the electoral vote at the same percentage as the popular vote. Now, I'm not going to get into this because we don't have time, and we've already talked about some of this in class, or you've seen some of it within the video of whose vote counts. But there's that. And then there's also the idea that some people think that we should just have a direct popular election and just get rid of the Electoral College, where the people get the direct vote and whoever gets more than 50% wins. And again, I'm not totally against this, but we've seen people make bad decisions and not know who they're voting for, or only voting for one issue, and that's not necessarily what you want to see. So that would be more of a drawback to that system if we were to go to the direct popular election full time. All right, guys, last thing here is inauguration. So whoever becomes president, whether they're being reelected or they're a new president, they will be known as the president-elect if they're a new president until inauguration. But the inauguration is on January 20th at noon following the election year. So January 20th of 2021 will be the inauguration for either President Trump, his second one, which will be more of a bigger affair in terms of, it'll still be grandiose, but generally the actual induction is a lot less of pomp and circumstance the second time around because they're in office doing things. Or it'll be for Biden and it'll be like a parade and more of a, it'll be bigger. Okay, just because he's not effectively the president until he takes that oath of office. So there's changes there. They do have to take the required constitutional oath. You can see Obama here taking that in the picture here in front of the Capitol, and that is where they hold the ceremony is outside the Capitol. All right, guys, that's all I got for you in terms of the inauguration and the electoral process. We got the election coming up. It's going to be a crazy one, and we'll see how it goes on Tuesday and in the days after if it needs to be. I also have a few links to some videos. Now, some of these are outdated SNL ones. If you guys want to have some fun, you can watch them on the original. You do not have to. They're just there for you if you choose to do so, if they still work. All right, guys, have a good one.